I don't know. I'm gonna stay warm. I'm gonna try to. More layers, blankets.
It's cold. If you got any blankets, you better try to hold on to them. Or if you ain't, the next homeless man walk by that need a blanket, he gonna get your blanket.
Early March in Chicago still carries a particular kind of cold. The dry wind cuts into your skin. Each breath burns in your lungs. And nighttime temperatures are cold enough to wake you with numb fingers. Beneath West Side Bridge, a small tent camp survives like a nightly standoff with the weather. Everyone has their own method for staying warm. Everyone believes their method is the right one. Hand warmers stuffed into boots, feet wrapped tightly inside sleeping bags. Heated stones are placed at the bottom for warmth. But one night in early March, Marcus Williams, a 58-year-old former HVAC technician, did something the camp considered completely wrong. He placed his hand warmers in a spot that made the entire camp burst out laughing. The next morning, he was one of the only people who stepped out of his tent without shaking from the cold. In today's episode of The Homeless Fact, we break down why the action that people mocked actually followed basic physics and medical science. If you've ever been criticized for doing something differently from everyone else, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more survival lessons that the streets have learned the hard way. The tent camp under the bridge and the rules of staying warm. Early March in Chicago is still far from spring. Cold, dry air burns the lungs, and the wind whipping beneath the bridge slices through clothing like a thin blade. One wrong night in the wrong spot can leave the body paying the price. Under the West Side Bridge, the tent community survives through a set of unwritten survival rules passed from person to person. Heat rises, so place the heat source low. Protect the feet first, because frostbite usually begins in the toes. Hand warmers are stuffed into boots. Hot stones go to the bottom of sleeping bags. Thick socks stack up like armor. And because these rules have saved lives before, anyone who breaks them quickly becomes the subject of jokes. Marcus was 58 years old. He had been homeless for 7 years. But before that, he spent 23 years as an HVAC technician, repairing heating systems for commercial buildings. He learned to read hot spots and cold spots the way others read blueprints. He understood that placing heat in the right location could shift the behavior of an entire system. After layoffs in 2015, everything unraveled. His family broke apart. Savings disappeared. His car was gone. Eventually, the tent under the bridge became the last address left. What remained from his previous life was a habit, looking at problems through physics, not just through instinct. So when the cold wind dropped to dangerous levels that night, Marcus used the same 2 hand warmers everyone else had, but he didn't put them in his boots. Instead, he placed them higher, against the inner part of his thighs. Laughter spread across the camp. Jokes echoed through the dark. Marcus simply zipped his sleeping bag and lay still. A night of laughter and a morning when no one was laughing. That night, the laughter spread through the camp like a defense against fear. People joked about where Marcus had placed the hand warmers. They joked about the old guy showing off. They repeated the rule everyone believed: warm your feet first. The cold always takes the toes first. Marcus didn't argue. He had long grown used to people believing what they'd always heard and dismissing what they'd never tried. He zipped his sleeping bag shut, pressed his arms against his chest to protect his core heat, and focused on slowing his breathing. Because fast breathing creates moisture, and moisture in freezing weather turns clothing into an enemy. Out on the street, cold rarely arrives like a sudden punch. It comes slowly. First, the fingertips go numb. Then the calves tighten. Then the mind begins whispering, maybe just sleep for a while. That's the trap. Marcus knew that trap well enough not to fall into it, so he trusted the only thing he was certain about: how heat actually moves. The next morning, many people stepped out of their tents shaking uncontrollably, faces pale, lips turning purple. Marcus was still cold, but he could stand, he could walk, and his feet, the part he had never warmed directly, still had feeling. No one apologized. No one admitted they had been wrong. But the looks changed. The laughter had turned into curiosity. Heeding the right blood path. Under the bridge, most people followed a simple logic. If your feet are cold, warm them. Marcus understood something different. When the body gets cold, blood vessels in the arms and legs constrict to preserve heat in the core. That means warm blood stops reaching the extremities. Hands and feet grow numb first. So hand warmers stuffed inside boots often only warm the socks. The heat then spreads into the sleeping bag and eventually into the cold ground. It feels warm quickly, but the warmth disappears just as quickly because the heat isn't being transported anywhere. That's where Marcus thought differently. "23 years working in HVAC taught him one rule. Don't heat individual corners of a room. Heat what circulates. In the human body, the circulating system is blood. So he placed the two hand warmers against the inner thigh, right where the femoral artery runs close to the skin. When that area warms, the blood flowing through it carries heat down to the feet and back toward the body's core. The warmth doesn't stay in one place. It circulates. That's why his feet warmed up even without direct heat. Once the principle was proven, the next challenge wasn't survival. It was persuasion. Marcus didn't lecture anyone. He simply gave a few precautions. Wrap the hand warmers in cloth. Check the skin for burning. Keep clothing dry, and place insulation beneath the body. In the camp, words mattered less than results. The first person willing to try his method was Deshaun, and that night would quietly change how the entire camp understood the cold. Deshaun switches sides in 30 minutes. Deshaun had laughed at Marcus without mercy. In a tent camp, doing something different often makes you look weak. But a few weeks later, Deshaun himself was the one struggling the most during a freezing night. His feet felt like wood. His body shook so hard he could barely hold the zipper of his sleeping bag. He had already done everything the camp believed in. Hand warmers stuffed into his boots, extra socks wrapped around his feet. Hot stones were pushed to the bottom of the sleeping bag. Every rule the camp passed around, he had followed them all. Yet the cold still crept upward, from the toes to the ankles to the calves, turning every minute into endurance. And in that moment, pride slowly began to give way to survival instinct. Marcus approached without sarcasm. He simply said, "Try my way." Deshaun hesitated. The placement of the hand warmers was awkward, almost embarrassing, but when your teeth are already chattering, you'll try almost anything that might carry you through the night. So he did. He placed 2 hand warmers high along the inner thighs, zipped his sleeping bag shut, and lay still. About 30 minutes later, Deshaun touched his toes and froze in disbelief. His feet were warming from the inside. Not the usual kind of warmth that sits in one spot, but a steady warmth spreading slowly and evenly. He looked up at Marcus as if asking, "How?" Marcus simply nodded, as though the answer were obvious when heat is placed in the right place. The next morning, Deshaun walked around the camp telling the story. This time, not to mock, but to show others how to escape the cold's quiet scythe. Lessons learned through real bodies and real nights always spread faster than words printed on paper. Warming the feet. Warms comfort, warming the core, warms life. After Deshaun's success, the camp began questioning its old habits. They didn't lack hand warmers. What they lacked was a clear understanding of what the body does when it's cold. When temperatures drop, the body constricts blood vessels in the arms and legs to preserve heat in the core. Warm blood stays near vital organs. Hands and feet are sacrificed first. So, placing heat packs inside boots often works like throwing coal against a single wall. It warms the spot temporarily, then the heat escapes into the ground and the surrounding air. You feel comfortable for a moment, but the body itself isn't being warmed in any meaningful way. And when the heat pack cools down, the cold returns with brutal speed. Marcus explained it the way someone who repaired heating systems his entire life would. "Don't heat the room," he said. "Heat the system that warms the room." In the human body, that system is the blood circulation. The femoral artery in the inner thigh is like a highway for heat. It runs close to the surface and carries large volumes of blood. Warming that location means warming the flow itself, allowing heat to travel naturally down to the feet. Sometimes, when possible, Marcus added a second trick, placing a hot water bottle near the lower abdomen to warm the body's core even further. The method wasn't elegant, but it worked. In a muddy camp beneath a bridge, effectiveness always wins over pride. People began knocking on Marcus's tent instead of asking each other. From the strange old man everyone mocked, he slowly became the one person the camp trusted when the cold returned. Furnace, when knowledge starts saving lives. After Deshaun shared the story, Marcus was no longer the old man doing things wrong. The camp gave him a nickname, Furnace. The name sounded playful, but it carried a deeper meaning. Whenever the temperature dropped and someone began shaking uncontrollably, they went to Marcus before looking for extra blankets. Marcus never made promises. He approached it like a technician diagnosing a heating system. He checked whether the person's clothes were wet or dry, whether insulation existed beneath their body, whether the heat packs were still active, and how long they would last. Only then did he explain where to place them. On the streets, bad advice doesn't just damage credibility, it can cost someone their life. Marcus repeated a few critical rules. Never place the heat pack directly against bare skin. Wrap it in cloth to prevent burns. Move it immediately if the skin begins to sting, and never let the body sweat before entering a sleeping bag. He also reminded people of something easy to forget, the ground itself. Without insulation beneath your back, core heat drains straight into the concrete. Marcus's technique didn't solve everything, but it made 2 cheap hand warmers far more effective because the heat entered a place where circulation could carry it through the body. And when the body stopped shaking constantly, people slept more deeply. The next morning, they woke up with just enough strength left to search for help. Among people who owned almost nothing left to share, Marcus had shared the most valuable asset possible: knowledge that could keep someone alive. When tradition loses to physics. Not everyone under the bridge followed Marcus's method. Some kept using the old way, not because they were stubborn, but because habit is often the last thing people still have when everything else in life has been stripped away. Some felt embarrassed about the placement of the heat packs. Some believed, if the old way kept me alive this long, why change it? Others feared experimenting. If the new method failed, they wouldn't just lose a night of sleep, they might lose the strength to stand the next morning. In extreme cold, conservatism sometimes becomes a form of self-defense. Marcus didn't argue. He understood something every technician learns. Systems only change when the failure becomes visible. The flaw in warming the feet directly doesn't show immediately. It gives quick comfort, making you believe you're safe. Then it quietly fades while circulation remains restricted. People blame the hand warmer for being weak. They rarely consider the possibility that they placed it in the wrong location. Marcus simply waited for longer cold nights, the nights when comfort alone could no longer save anyone. And something interesting began to happen. Once someone tried the new method and felt their feet warming without direct heat, they rarely returned to the old one. No speeches were needed. The body itself became the proof. Under the bridge, a new kind of knowledge began spreading, not through lectures, but through survival. The person who made it through the night would teach the next person the following morning. In a community often dismissed as chaotic and broken, this quiet exchange of practical knowledge became the closest thing to order they had. From under the bridge to the warming center, when knowledge becomes a form of aid. Winter eventually passed, but Marcus did not disappear from the story like a seasonal trick. He moved from the tent camp into temporary transitional housing and began appearing regularly at a warming center on the south side of the city. There, he didn't just hand out blankets or point people to empty beds. He taught newly homeless people how to read their own bodies in the cold, how to recognize when sweat is forming without realizing, how numb feet may actually be caused by restricted blood flow, when to protect the core instead of desperately trying to save the toes. Marcus explained everything in practical terms. No complicated medical language, just images from his old trade. The body, he said, works like a heating system. Blood is the pipeline. Place heat at the right point and the whole system benefits. He showed where to place hand warmers. He reminded people to wrap them in cloth to avoid burns. He taught them to check their skin regularly because extreme cold can hide the feeling of overheating. And he emphasized something many people forget. Lying directly on cold ground without insulation is like donating heat to the concrete. What matters most is what you place under your body, not just on top of it. But the most valuable thing Marcus offered wasn't a trick. It was respect. Many newcomers arrived at the warming center guarded and suspicious. They were used to being ordered around or judged. Marcus spoke to them like a coworker, explaining a night shift, short, clear, and without judgment. Sometimes that alone was enough for someone to try a different way of surviving. Marcus's story reminds us that some knowledge never appears on pamphlets or posters. It lives inside people who were once laughed at. People who were cold enough to understand that intuition can be wrong, but physics rarely is. And when one person learns how to stay warm through understanding, they can keep others warm too. Not with fire, but by placing heat in the right place. An open-ended warm, the right place, and see the right person. Marcus's story is not only about the cold. It is about how easily we misjudge people when we see them in the wrong circumstances. A former HVAC technician pushed beneath a bridge still carried the same skill he used in commercial buildings, the ability to read a system and find the point where heat actually works. When Marcus applied that knowledge to his own body, he didn't just keep himself alive. He created a survival method that could be passed on to Deshawn, to the people shaking through the night, to newcomers who had not yet learned why their feet go numb first. The deeper lesson is simple but powerful. Sometimes we laugh at something because it looks strange. Only later do we realize that the strange thing was actually knowledge. And sometimes what saves a life is not expensive equipment, but a correct understanding of the body and someone patient enough to share it. If society had listened sooner, many street-born solutions might never have required nights of cold to prove their value. Tomorrow, Marcus may still wake up with very little, but each winter he stands in a warming center and another person may make it through the night with less fear. Another person may wake up with enough strength to keep going. Hope sometimes begins with something that small. May those living without homes one day find real ones, so they no longer have to learn physics through the cold or prove their worth simply by surviving it. Amen.